Hi, and congratulations on completing week 3, Understanding Old Testament Narrative Part 2. So, this week we wanted to analyze the narrative components of plot, dialogue, time, and characterization, and you did that in your paper, and to create a personal interpretive methodology for historical narrative. Again, the point of the paper was to give you a chance to use some of the skills that you're reading about in your textbooks on how to understand narrative. So as you move beyond this course and you encounter the genre of narrative, you know to back up and not just look historically at it, which we want to do in other methods, but to look at how the story was crafted by the author or how the narrator's voice moves the story along. And then finally, to analyze specifically the sacrifice of Isaac and apply the hermeneutical meaning to a contemporary situation. Now, our assignment 3.1 was a narrative analysis for the sacrifice of Isaac, and I wanted you to look at the various aspects of plot, character, time, and dialogue and really deconstruct those to understand how this passage is put together. And for the most part, I thought that folks did a good job. On this assignment, it's a tough assignment because you can do multiple levels. And I thought at the first level, just analyzing plot, character, time, dialogue, we did well. But being able to dive in and really say, why did the author leave out, for instance, Sarah? Why is she, and this came up in the discussion post, but why do we not learn about Sarah? Why did we not learn about what Isaac is thinking? So if we didn't learn about Sarah or Isaac's thoughts, then it wasn't relative to what the author was trying to teach us. So then we have to loop back and say, okay, well, what was included and why is that important? And this is all about Abraham and setting Abraham up as the hero of faith and obedience. And someone wrote in, I know I'm getting ahead, but someone wrote in the discussion post about how obedience is perhaps God's love language. And I liked that a lot because, in fact, the test is all about Abraham's obedience. So here are just some of the keys that I saw, that it's not, I wanted not just an overview of the plot, but an analysis of how the story is being put together. How how is foreshadow being used? How is climax being used? And how is our discomfort with what's taking place, how is that being developed by the way the author is writing the narrative? Where is the climax? And only a few people really discuss that. But when we look at plot, we want to know where is the climax of that plot. How does the author use verbs to hasten time? Where and how is dialogue is used, and where and how is it omitted? Is Abraham flat, or is he a round character? Is he developed? Do we understand more of his thoughts? Notice we don't have any clue what they're wearing. I mean, the narrator and the author are really paring down the amount of information we're given to stay on course. How about Isaac and the servants? Don't forget that God is a character. What is the role of the narrator? I needed for you to be able to demonstrate engagement with the reading so that I knew the methodology that you were using and why. And I needed a strong conclusion summarizing the keys to the narrative and some personal reflection on the use or purpose of the passage and how the construction of the story aided that purpose. So there's a lot to this assignment. Grades were a little lower. Instead of the 93 to 99s that are more typical, there were a lot more Bs on this assignment, and that's normal. But I wanted to challenge you to dive deeper as we move through the balance of the course. And then our second assignment was a discussion post where you two were to explain the purpose of the test. After these things, God tested Abraham, and then at the end, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. So what is that purpose that God says, for now I know implying that God didn't know before. I thought the posts were actually very good. The beginning part of that, the first part is, does God have omniscience? That's fairly easy to prove, but I was wanting you to move through the biblical support passages that show that God is in fact omniscient. If God is omniscient, which we know to be true, then what does this statement, "for now I know that you fear God," what does that mean? And I feel that a few of you made that transition, a few didn't. Grades shifted on there. But the point was that God has in fact known now that Abraham knows, so it's more of a transitive property, that the test is not whether or not Abraham will comply and be obedient, but the test is, does Abraham know that he is now obedient and faithful to God? And now Abraham knows this to be true. So some of the keys, context, start with Genesis 15 and the promises to Abraham, and then need to demonstrate engagement with both the Bible and the reading. In speaking of Abraham's faith, James in chapter 2 states, "You see that faith was acting along with his works, and faith was completed by his works. And the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness, and he was called a friend of God." And so according to James, faith without works is dead. And so my first answer for why God tested Abraham is that this test is to be the fulfillment of Abraham's faith. And so it's not that, James is, by the way, not saying that if you don't do works, you are not saved. It's in fact just the opposite. Abraham had faith, and therefore his works with Isaac were the outcropping of that faith. And that's the kind of thing that James is trying to get to in chapter 2. And I wanted to see that you move your transition from looking specifically at this passage to, in fact, exploring how the passage is understood in the New Testament. I wanted a discussion perhaps of Psalm 139 or others, that God is omniscient, and then that God would test Abraham here to demonstrate and foreshadow what is to come in Jesus, the one true sacrifice. It is on Mount Moriah where God sent Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, and that would eventually be the location of Jerusalem, the place where God would provide the sacrifice for all men in Jesus' death on the cross, which is pretty fitting considering we just had Easter. So Abraham called the name of that place, "The Lord will provide. As it is said to this day, on the mount of the Lord it shall be provided," in Genesis 22:14. That's from a student post, and I thought it was just really poignant and on task. So thanks for all the hard work this week. I'm looking forward to week 4, and I'll talk to you soon.